I clearly have to update my my website at OCAD because I don't teach those courses anymore. But I do teach here, and I in integrated media and in the new minor in art and social change. It's with absolute delight that I welcome you here to OCAD today. Such absolute delight that it's brought me out. It's the only thing that could bring me out of my sick bed this morning. Robert asked me to introduce Roland and to just briefly talk about the significance I see for this conference, Diasporic Intimacies. I've worked for many years on issues of queer Asian diaspora as an artist, a critic, and an organizer. As a fourth-generation Chinese Trinidadian raised Creole and Catholic in the Caribbean, the term Asian actually was very convenient for me, because on the one hand, it allowed me to slip past questions of ethnic authenticity when I moved to Canada and kept meeting people from China, my homeland, I guess, 4 generations ago, 150 years ago. But it also allowed me to work together with other people with whom I shared experiences of racism and Orientalist discourses based on phenotype and history around colonial histories. At the same time, whereas the Asian has been incredibly attractive, I think that it's really also important that Asian not be allowed to erase the questions of specificity and the specific histories and identities that people who may fall under that pan-ethnicity actually experience. So I'm finding it really hard to look at my note and you, so I'm kind of winging it at this point. Sorry, I hope my memory is not gone with my health. Let me see if I can find my way here. Right. And this is why this conference is so important in the exploration of the specificity of queer Filipino, Canadian scholarship, cultural production, activism, and identities, which articulates with a number of very urgent conversations in Canada and indeed in the world. These include the push and pull factors of transnational labor migration, which is increasingly important, I think, within Canadian policy and Canadian life, as well as internationally. Multiculturalism and racism, cultural globalization, homonationalism, and its counterpart. We often do the critique of homonationalism, but the heteronationalisms that it also responds to. Indigenous identities and claims, and national imaginaries. This is a landmark event, but things don't come out of nowhere, and I want to recall my own experience of Filipino organizing, Canadian organizing in Toronto. When I first started working on queer Asian Canadian issues in the late 1970s, the most active progressive Asian grouping in the city was a coalition against the Marcos dictatorship. I particularly remember Voltaire de Leon and the late Carmencita Ging Hernandez, who were leaders at that time and who contributed to the larger project of Pan-Asian organizing. I believe I met them both through the Asian Resource Workshop, Asian Magazine, as well as to the development of social justice organizing and an anti-imperialist discourse in Canada at the time. Because at that time also the other issues were anti-apartheid organizing, if you remember, and struggles in Latin America for social justice around Chile and particularly Nicaragua at that time in the late 1970s. Neither were queer identified, but they were allies in the struggle of lesbian and gay Asians organizing at that time, which created space and confidence. I was wondering whether I should mention this little anecdote, but it's stuck in my head, so I will, if I may just. One of the things in my archive, and if I had had time, I would have just pulled it out for you, is I think in the early 1980s, I wrote a letter to Balita, the Filipino newspaper at the time, criticizing what I saw as a homophobic reference, which they printed with great prominence in the newspaper. And one of the things that I was thinking is not only is the way that response of acknowledging the question of homophobia created confidence of those of us who were organizing around these issues, that yes, this is an issue that could be heard. It created a kind of space, and how those spaces allowed us to continue the work. I also want to shout out to the late pioneer, Nito Marquez, who was a member of the transnational activist performance group of recovering Catholics, the Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence. And for those of you who are too young to know what they were, they dressed as very flamboyant nuns and zapped the city. Nito was one of the first gay activist Asians I met in Toronto, and he joined Tony Souza, Gerald Chan, and myself to form Gay Asians Toronto in 1980. OCAD University is incredibly honored to be hosting this historic event, which is so appropriate because so many of the participants are some of our honored grads, and I'm looking at some of them right now. But the fact that this is happening here is really due to the work of Robert Diaz, who in less than a year has gained almost mythic status within this institution for his vision, commitment, boundless energy, and his enthusiasm. It's kind of like, does he really exist? Who is this Robert Diaz that everybody's talking about? Okay, so I don't know, Mike, if he has a kind of a Dorian Gray other side, but we haven't seen it, and we'll have to talk later. We're really honored and lucky to have you, Robert. It's such a pleasure to have you here. And so the thing about Robert is not just his energy, but also his amazing grace and all-around loveliness. Now to Roland. Roland Sintos Coloma is a chair and professor of the Department of Teacher Education at Miami University in Ohio, USA. Previously, he was a faculty member in the Department of Social Justice Education at the Ontario Institute for Studies in Education, OISE, at the University of Toronto, by supporting a whole group of graduate students working on important areas around Asian Canadian studies. But he really became a hub, a kind of node that pushed this while he was here. I am personally grateful that Roland is a collaborator along with Amar Wahab on my own Shirk project that was mentioned by Robert that looks at 30 years of LGBT Asian Canadian queer organizing. As a colleague, he's incredibly committed, generous, rigorous, insightful, and well, just fabulous. So here's a fabulous Roland Coloma.